Some secrets are buried so deep they become the foundation upon which entire lives are built, and some loves are so forbidden they can only survive in hidden letters and stolen moments that echo through generations. I'm Eleanor, and today I hold in my hands perhaps the most emotionally complex correspondence I have ever discovered. Last month, while helping to clear out the estate of the renowned Blackwood family in Boston, I found myself alone in their legendary library when an old leather-bound volume of Shakespeare caught my eye. As I opened it, a letter fell to the floor like a whisper from the past, its faded ink telling a story of love, deception, and a secret so powerful it had shaped 3 lives in ways that none of them could have imagined. This is the story of Charlotte Hartwell, a young governess who arrived at a grand mansion believing she understood her place in the world, only to discover that the man she was falling for carried a secret that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the price we pay for happiness. Have you ever fallen in love with someone only to discover they were hiding something that changed everything you felt about them? Share your story in the comments, because Charlotte's journey will show you that sometimes our deepest truths are found in the very lies that should have destroyed us. Boston, Massachusetts, in the crisp autumn of 1836, was a city where merchant princes built their fortunes on international trade, where federal-style mansions lined the tree-shaded streets of Beacon Hill like monuments to American prosperity, and where the rigid social order of New England society dictated that everyone knew their place and stayed within the boundaries that separated the wealthy from the working, the respected from the unknown. Charlotte Hartwell stepped down from the hired carriage that had brought her to the imposing front door of the Blackwood mansion on Louisburg Square, carrying the worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned in the world and feeling the weight of both opportunity and apprehension as she prepared to begin her new position as governess to the children of one of Boston's most prominent widowers. At 23 years old, Charlotte possessed the kind of quiet beauty that revealed itself slowly to those who took time to look beyond surface appearances, with auburn hair that caught the light when she turned her head, intelligent brown eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing little of her own thoughts, and a grace that spoke of good breeding despite her current circumstances as a woman who earned her living through her education and skills rather than through family wealth or social connections. Charlotte's journey to the Blackwood mansion had been shaped by circumstances that had forced her to leave the comfortable middle-class life of her childhood and seek employment that would provide both income and respectability for a young woman whose father's early death had left his family with debts that consumed their modest inheritance and made it necessary for Charlotte to find work that would allow her to support herself while maintaining the dignity that her upbringing had taught her to value above comfort or ease. Her education, which included fluency in French, competence in Latin, knowledge of literature and history that exceeded what most young women of her era received, and musical skills that made her valuable as a teacher, had prepared her for the demanding but respectable work of educating the children of wealthy families who could afford to provide their offspring with instruction that went beyond the basic literacy and arithmetic that satisfied most parents. The Blackwood mansion stood as one of the finest examples of federal architecture on Beacon Hill, its red brick facade adorned with white trim and elegant proportions that spoke of both wealth and refined taste, surrounded by iron fencing that separated the property from the public street while allowing passers-by to admire gardens that were maintained with the kind of meticulous care that only unlimited resources could provide. The interior of the house reflected the same combination of elegance and comfort, with high ceilings, elaborate crown molding, and furnishings that had been selected not only for their beauty but for their representation of the cultural sophistication that distinguished the truly wealthy from those who merely possessed money without the education and refinement to use it appropriately. Edward Blackwood, the master of this impressive establishment, was a man of 38 whose commanding presence and obvious intelligence had made him one of Boston's most successful merchants, while his personal tragedy and reserved demeanor had made him one of the city's most eligible but seemingly unattainable widowers. Edward had built his fortune through shipping interests that connected Boston to markets throughout Europe and Asia, through investments in the textile mills that were transforming New England's economy, and through the kind of strategic thinking that had allowed him to anticipate market changes and position his businesses to profit from opportunities that others missed or failed to understand. His success had provided him with wealth that exceeded most people's imagination, but it had not protected him from the personal losses that had left him raising 2 young children while struggling with grief that he had never fully processed or overcome. Edward's late wife, Margaret Blackwood, had died 3 years earlier from consumption, a disease that had slowly stolen her strength and vitality while doctors stood helplessly by, unable to offer treatment that could halt the progression of an illness that claimed the lives of countless victims regardless of their wealth, social position, or the devotion of those who loved them. Margaret's death had been particularly devastating because it had followed years of apparent recovery and renewed health, creating hope that had been cruelly destroyed when the disease returned with a virulence that overcame all attempts to fight it and left Edward with memories of happiness that felt more like torture than comfort when he faced the reality of life without the woman who had been not only his wife but his closest friend and most trusted advisor. The children Edward was raising alone were testament to both his love for Margaret and his determination to provide them with the stability and education they needed despite the absence of the mother who had planned to guide their development and share in their achievements. 8-year-old James possessed his father's intelligence and his mother's gentle nature, combining curiosity about the world around him with sensitivity that made him responsive to others' emotions and needs, while 6-year-old Emily had inherited her mother's delicate beauty and her father's strength of will, creating a personality that was both charming and challenging for adults who attempted to guide her behavior and development. Charlotte's first weeks in the Blackwood household had been devoted to understanding her charge's personalities, abilities, and educational needs while simultaneously adjusting to life in a home where wealth provided comforts she had never experienced but where emotional undercurrents suggested complications that were not immediately apparent to someone whose position required her to observe without intruding and to serve without questioning the private matters that affected her employers. Moods and decisions. Charlotte had quickly established routines that provided structure for the children's learning while allowing them to develop their individual interests and talents, creating an educational environment that combined academic rigor with the kind of emotional support that helped James overcome shyness and encouraged Emily's natural leadership while teaching her consideration for others. The relationship between Charlotte and Edward had developed gradually and carefully, beginning with formal discussions about the children's progress and educational goals, evolving through conversations about books and ideas that revealed shared interests and compatible intellectual approaches, and slowly deepening into friendship based on mutual respect and the kind of understanding that develops between people who share responsibilities and concerns that create natural bonds of cooperation and trust. Edward's appreciation for Charlotte's intelligence and dedication had been evident from their earliest interactions, while Charlotte's admiration for Edward's devotion to his children and his integrity in both personal and business matters had grown as she observed his character through daily interactions that revealed qualities that went far beyond the surface impression of wealth and social position. But Charlotte had also become aware that Edward carried burdens that went beyond the grief of losing his wife, sensing in his moments of distraction and melancholy something deeper than simple mourning. something that suggested secrets or regrets that continued to affect his present life in ways that she could not understand but could not ignore, as she found herself caring about his happiness in ways that went beyond professional concern for her employer's welfare. Edward's library had become Charlotte's favorite retreat during the quiet hours when the children were occupied with other activities or sleeping, offering her access to books that fed her intellectual curiosity while providing a peaceful environment where she could think and reflect on the complexities of her new life and her growing attachment to a family whose happiness had become important to her in ways that she knew exceeded the boundaries of professional service. It was during one of these solitary hours in the library, as autumn rain drummed against tall windows and candlelight flickered over shelves that contained the accumulated wisdom of centuries, that Charlotte made the discovery that would change her understanding of everything she thought she knew about Edward, his marriage, and the family whose lives had become intertwined with her own in ways that she was only beginning to comprehend. She had been searching for a volume of poetry that she planned to share with James, whose love of language and rhythm made him particularly responsive to verse, when her fingers encountered an old leather-bound copy of Hamlet that seemed to call for attention despite its worn appearance and position among more impressive volumes. As Charlotte opened the book to examine its condition and determine whether it would be suitable for educational purposes, a folded letter slipped from between pages that had clearly served as its hiding place for years, falling to the Persian carpet at her feet like a secret that could no longer bear the weight of concealment. The letter was written on paper that had yellowed with age, in handwriting that was unmistakably feminine but which Charlotte did not immediately recognize, sealed with wax that had cracked but still bore the impression of what appeared to be a signet ring that suggested the writer had been someone of social position and education. Charlotte's first instinct was to return the letter to its hiding place without reading contents that were clearly private and which she had discovered accidentally rather than through any intention to pry into matters that did not concern her. But curiosity and the recognition that the letter might contain information relevant to the family she served overcame her scruples about respecting privacy, particularly when she noticed that the letter was addressed to "My dearest Edward" in a hand that suggested intimacy and affection that went beyond formal correspondence. Charlotte's decision to read the letter was influenced by her growing concerns about Edward's emotional state and her hope that understanding more about his past might help her better serve the needs of both him and his children, whom she had come to love as though they were her own family. The letter that Charlotte unfolded with trembling hands contained revelations that challenged every assumption she had made about Edward's marriage and the circumstances that had shaped his life during the years before she entered his household. The letter was dated 5 years earlier, written by Margaret Blackwood during what must have been the early stages of the illness that would eventually claim her life, addressed to her husband with love and desperation that spoke of knowledge that she could no longer keep secret and guilt that had been consuming her spirit along with the disease that was destroying her body. "My dearest Edward," the letter began, "I write this knowing that I may not have the courage to speak these words aloud, and knowing that you may never forgive me for the deception I have practiced throughout our marriage. But I cannot face death without confessing the truth that has shaped every day of our life together and every moment of happiness we have shared. The love I have given you has been real and absolute, but it has not been the whole truth of my heart, and I fear that my silence has stolen from you the honest relationship that you deserved and that might have brought us both different forms of happiness if I had possessed the courage to trust you with my complete truth from the beginning." The letter continued with revelations that explained the undercurrents of sadness and complexity that Charlotte had sensed in Edward's household but had never been able to understand or address. Margaret's confession detailed a love that had existed before her marriage to Edward, a relationship with someone whose social position and circumstances had made marriage impossible but whose place in her heart had never been completely replaced even by the genuine affection she had developed for the husband who had provided her with security, respect, and the kind of partnership that society approved and celebrated. Margaret had written about James Morrison, a young man she had loved with passionate intensity during her youth, someone whose family's financial difficulties and lack of social connections had made him unsuitable as a husband despite his personal qualities and the depth of feeling that existed between them. Social pressure from Margaret's family and practical concerns about financial security had convinced her to accept Edward's proposal and abandon hopes of a future with James, but she had never forgotten her first love or completely overcome the regret that had haunted her even during moments of contentment in her marriage to Edward. The most shocking revelation in Margaret's letter was that James had not disappeared from her life after her marriage as Charlotte had initially assumed, but had remained in Boston as part of Edward's business organization, accepting employment that allowed him to maintain contact with Margaret while concealing from Edward the true nature of their previous relationship and the feelings that continued to exist between them despite the impossibility of acting on those emotions without destroying the lives of everyone involved. Margaret's confession detailed years of secret correspondence, stolen moments of conversation, and emotional intimacy that had coexisted with her role as Edward's wife and the mother of his children, creating a triangle of relationships that had satisfied none of the participants completely while providing each with something essential that they had been unable to find elsewhere. Margaret had written with particular anguish about the toll that maintaining these dual relationships had taken on her health and peace of mind, expressing her belief that the consumption that was killing her had been accelerated by the emotional stress of living with divided loyalties and the constant fear that her deception would be discovered and destroy the happiness of the two men she loved in different ways. Her letter revealed that she had been torn between gratitude for Edward's love and devotion and guilt about her inability to return his feelings with the completeness he deserved, while simultaneously mourning the life she might have lived with James if circumstances had been different and social conventions had been less rigid about relationships that crossed class boundaries. The letter that Charlotte held in shaking hands concluded with Margaret's desperate plea for forgiveness and her instructions about information that she wanted Edward to have after her death, including details about her relationship with James that she hoped would help Edward understand that her love for another man had not diminished her respect and affection for him or her gratitude for the life they had built together. Margaret had asked Edward to forgive both her deception and James's continued presence in their lives, expressing her hope that understanding her complete truth would free Edward from any guilt or self-doubt about his role in her happiness and allow him to find future love that would be based on honest communication rather than the careful concealment that had characterized their marriage. But as Charlotte read the final paragraphs of Margaret's confession, she realized that the letter had never been delivered to Edward, that he had been living for 3 years with grief and confusion that might have been eased by understanding the complex reality of his wife's heart and the reasons for emotional distance that he had interpreted as his own failure to provide the happiness she deserved. Margaret's letter had been hidden in a book rather than given to Edward, suggesting that she had either lost courage at the last moment or had died before she could arrange for its delivery, leaving Edward to mourn not only Margaret's death but also his perceived failure to win her complete love. Charlotte's discovery of Margaret's letter created both an opportunity and a dilemma that would test her own integrity and force her to choose between protecting Edward from painful knowledge and providing him with truth that might help him understand and overcome the grief that continued to darken his life and affect his relationship with his children. The letter explained many things that Charlotte had observed but not understood, Edward's tendency toward melancholy even during happy moments with his children, his reluctance to speak about Margaret in ways that suggested unresolved issues rather than simply missing someone who had died, and his apparent inability to consider the possibility of future love despite his attractiveness and the obvious benefits that remarriage could provide for both him and his children. The revelation that James Morrison was not only still alive but still employed by Edward created additional complications that Charlotte struggled to understand and evaluate. If Edward did not know about Margaret's true feelings for James, then he was unknowingly working closely with someone who had loved his wife and whom his wife had loved throughout their marriage, creating a situation that might be either tragically ironic or potentially dangerous depending on James's current feelings and intentions. Charlotte's limited interactions with James Morrison during her months in the household had given her impressions of a competent, reserved man who seemed to carry his own burden of sadness, but she had not suspected that his emotional state might be connected to secret grief for Margaret or complicated feelings about his continued proximity to Edward and the children. Charlotte's growing love for Edward, which had developed gradually as she came to appreciate his character and felt the natural attraction that proximity and shared concerns had fostered, was now complicated by knowledge that forced her to question whether her feelings were appropriate and whether acting on them would be fair to Edward or to the memory of Margaret, whose complex truth had been hidden from the man she had married. Charlotte understood that her feelings for Edward went far beyond professional respect or gratitude for kind treatment, but she also realized that pursuing a relationship with him while keeping Margaret's secret would be building love on the same foundation of deception that had troubled Margaret throughout her marriage. The moral complexity of Charlotte's situation was further complicated by her recognition that James Morrison's presence in the household might represent either a continuing threat to Edward's peace of mind or an opportunity for resolution and healing if the truth were handled sensitively and all parties were given the chance to address the past honestly rather than continuing to live with secrets that affected everyone's ability to find happiness in the present. Charlotte's education and natural intelligence gave her the capacity to analyze the emotional dynamics of the situation, but her relative youth and inexperience with such complex human relationships left her uncertain about how to proceed in ways that would serve everyone's best interests rather than simply protecting herself from difficulty. During the weeks that followed her discovery of Margaret's letter, Charlotte found herself observing Edward and James with new understanding of the undercurrents that had shaped their working relationship and personal interactions over the years since Margaret's death. Edward's treatment of James revealed both genuine appreciation for his business competence and an emotional distance that suggested unresolved tension or discomfort that Edward himself probably did not fully understand. While James's behavior toward Edward combined loyalty and efficiency with occasional moments of what Charlotte now recognized as guilt and regret that went beyond normal professional concerns about disappointing an employer. The children's interactions with James also took on new significance when Charlotte realized that he had been present throughout their lives as someone who had loved their mother in ways they could not understand and who might feel protective of them not only because of their connection to Edward but because of his own relationship with Margaret. James's gentle treatment of both James and Emily and his obvious knowledge of their personalities and preferences suggested involvement that went beyond casual acquaintance with his employer's children, while the sadness Charlotte occasionally observed in his face when he watched them play or learn was now explained by understanding that he was seeing traces of the woman he had loved in children who could never know the truth about his feelings for their mother. The emotional burden of carrying Margaret's secret while trying to navigate her own developing relationship with Edward became increasingly difficult for Charlotte as she realized that her love for him was growing stronger despite her knowledge of the complications that surrounded his past and might affect their future. Edward's gradual movement from formal employer to trusted friend had been accompanied by signs that he was beginning to see Charlotte as more than simply his children's governess, but Charlotte's awareness of Margaret's hidden truth made her uncertain about whether his interest in her represented genuine attraction or simply his need for companionship with someone who reminded him of what he had lost. The crisis that would force Charlotte to choose between maintaining Margaret's secret and revealing truth that might heal or destroy came during a December evening when Edward's melancholy had been particularly evident and his conversation had turned to his sense of failure as a husband and his fear that his children would grow up believing that marriage was something that brought sadness rather than joy. Edward's self-condemnation and his obvious pain in discussing Margaret made Charlotte realize that continuing to conceal the truth of Margaret's letter was allowing Edward to suffer unnecessarily while preventing him from understanding that his wife's emotional distance had not been caused by any failure on his part but by circumstances that had existed before their marriage and had been beyond his control. Charlotte's decision to reveal Margaret's secret required careful planning and sensitivity to the potential consequences for all involved, including James Morrison, whose life and livelihood could be affected by Edward's reaction to learning the truth about his relationship with Margaret. Charlotte understood that simply giving Edward the letter without preparation or context could cause more harm than healing, particularly if his reaction involved anger or betrayal that led him to make decisions that would damage James's reputation or position in Boston's business community, where such revelations could have lasting consequences for someone whose social position was already precarious. The conversation in which Charlotte revealed Margaret's secret to Edward took place in the library where she had discovered the letter, surrounded by books that represented the accumulated wisdom of generations who had faced similar moral dilemmas and found various ways to balance competing claims of love, loyalty, and truth. Charlotte's approach was careful and compassionate, beginning with acknowledgement of the difficult position she had been placed in by accidental discovery of information that was not intended for her, continuing with assurance that her motivation in revealing the secret was concern for Edward's happiness and peace of mind rather than any desire to create drama or complicate his life. Edward's initial reaction to Charlotte's revelation was shock and disbelief, followed by the complex mixture of pain and relief that comes from finally understanding circumstances that had been mysterious and troubling for years. The letter that Charlotte placed in his hands provided answers to questions that had tormented him throughout his marriage and during the years since Margaret's death, explaining her occasional emotional distance and the sadness that had sometimes shadowed even their happiest moments together. Edward's reading of Margaret's confession was accompanied by tears for the suffering she had endured in silence and for the opportunities for honest communication that had been lost due to her inability to trust him with her complete truth. The revelation that James Morrison had been Margaret's first love and had remained emotionally important to her throughout their marriage was particularly difficult for Edward to process, requiring him to re-evaluate years of working relationship and personal interaction in light of knowledge that changed the meaning of everything they had shared. Edward's initial impulse was anger at the deception that had been practiced against him, but Charlotte's gentle guidance helped him understand that both Margaret and James had been victims of social conventions that made their relationship impossible while forcing them to choose between honesty that would have destroyed lives and deception that protected everyone while satisfying no one completely. The confrontation between Edward and James that followed Charlotte's revelation was emotional and difficult but ultimately healing for both men, as they were finally able to acknowledge the triangle of relationships that had affected all of their lives while working toward understanding and forgiveness that could free them from the burden of secrets that had prevented any of them from finding complete happiness. James's confession of his continued love for Margaret and his gratitude for Edward's unknowing kindness in providing employment that allowed him to remain close to her was accompanied by his acknowledgement that the deception had been wrong and his willingness to accept whatever consequences Edward felt were appropriate. Edward's response to James's honesty revealed the character that had made him successful in business and worthy of both Margaret's respect and Charlotte's love, as he chose forgiveness over revenge and understanding over condemnation, recognizing that all of them had been trapped by social conventions that made honest relationships impossible while punishing attempts to find happiness outside approved boundaries. Edward's decision to maintain James's employment while acknowledging the truth about their relationship created a foundation for honest friendship that had been impossible while the secret remained hidden, allowing both men to support each other through grief that they could now share rather than bear alone. Charlotte's role in facilitating this reconciliation and healing had demonstrated her wisdom and compassion while also revealing the depth of her love for Edward and his children, leading naturally to recognition of feelings that had been developing between them despite the complications of their respective positions. Edward's gratitude for Charlotte's courage in revealing difficult truth was accompanied by acknowledgement of his growing love for someone whose intelligence, integrity, and devotion to his family had made her indispensable to his happiness and his children's well-being. The transformation of Charlotte's relationship with Edward from professional service to personal partnership was complicated by their awareness that their love had grown from circumstances that included secrets and revelations that would always be part of their shared history, but it was also strengthened by their knowledge that their relationship was based on complete honesty and mutual understanding rather than the careful concealment that had troubled Edward's marriage to Margaret. Charlotte's willingness to risk her position and Edward's anger in order to provide him with truth that might heal his pain had demonstrated the kind of love that seeks the beloved's happiness even when that happiness might come at personal cost to the lover. When you truly love someone, you want them to be free from pain, even if that freedom comes from knowledge that might change everything between you. Charlotte's courage in revealing Margaret's secret wasn't just about truth, it was about loving Edward enough to risk losing him if that's what healing required. Her story shows us that sometimes the greatest act of love is giving someone the information they need to find peace, even when that information might destroy the relationship you treasure most. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone from painful truth and giving them knowledge that might hurt but could ultimately heal? I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments, because these moments of moral courage define who we are and show us what love really means when tested by impossible choices. The marriage of Charlotte and Edward, which took place the following spring in a ceremony that was both joyful and meaningful because it represented the triumph of honest love over the complications and secrets that had shadowed their path to happiness, created not just a union between two people but a healing for an entire household that had been affected by years of hidden truth and unresolved grief. James Morrison's presence at the wedding as an honored guest rather than a source of tension or embarrassment demonstrated the transformation that honest communication had achieved, while the happiness of the children who had found in Charlotte not just an educator but a mother who loved them for themselves provided evidence that truth and forgiveness could create stronger families than deception and concealment. Charlotte's discovery of Margaret's letter had led not only to her own happiness but to healing for Edward and James that allowed them to honor Margaret's memory honestly while building lives that were not limited by guilt or misunderstanding about the past. The friendship that developed between Edward and James after the revelation of their shared love for Margaret created a support system that helped both men process their grief while maintaining connection to someone who understood their loss in ways that no one else could appreciate or share. The children's gradual understanding of the truth about their mother's complex heart, presented to them in age-appropriate ways as they grew older and could appreciate the moral complexity of adult relationships, provided them with a realistic foundation for their own future relationships while teaching them that love sometimes involves difficult choices and that honesty is essential for genuine happiness even when that honesty requires courage and creates temporary pain. Charlotte's role in the household evolved from governess to wife and mother in ways that honored both her previous service and her new position, while her relationship with Edward continued to grow stronger as they faced the normal challenges of marriage and family life with the advantage of complete trust and communication that had been tested by crisis and proven strong enough to support lasting happiness. Her love for Edward's children and their acceptance of her as their mother created bonds that were strengthened by shared knowledge that their family had been built on foundations of truth and forgiveness rather than convenient lies or necessary deceptions. The success of Charlotte and Edward's marriage, built as it was on the ruins of secrets that had been exposed and healed rather than hidden or ignored, became an example to other families in their social circle of the importance of honest communication and the possibility of finding happiness even after tragedy and betrayal had seemed to make such happiness impossible. Their story demonstrated that love could survive and thrive even when it included knowledge of previous relationships and complicated loyalties, provided that all parties were committed to truth and willing to work toward understanding and forgiveness. James Morrison's continued presence in their lives as both business partner and family friend represented the transformation that was possible when people chose healing over resentment and understanding over condemnation, while his own eventual marriage to someone who could accept his past and appreciate his character showed that honesty about previous relationships could be the foundation for new love rather than an obstacle to future happiness. James's relationship with Edward's children evolved from hidden protectiveness based on secret love for their mother to open affection based on shared family history and mutual respect, giving them another adult who cared about their welfare and could provide perspective on their mother's character that honored her memory while acknowledging her complexity. The library where Charlotte had discovered Margaret's letter became a symbol of the importance of preserving truth even when that truth was difficult or inconvenient, while also representing the power of knowledge to heal rather than simply to hurt when that knowledge was shared with love and wisdom rather than malice or revenge. Charlotte's love of books and learning, which had led to her accidental discovery of the secret that changed all their lives, continued to shape her role in the family as someone who valued education and intellectual growth while understanding that emotional intelligence was equally important for creating relationships that could survive the tests of time and circumstance. The annual remembrance they established for Margaret, conducted with the participation of both Edward and James, created a way to honor her memory that acknowledged both her love for Edward and her children and her connection to James, allowing all of them to grieve and remember without the secrecy that had prevented healing while she was alive. These ceremonies became opportunities for honest conversation about love, loss, and the complexity of human relationships, providing Edward's children with realistic preparation for their own adult lives while honoring their mother's memory in ways that celebrated her love rather than hiding her struggles. Charlotte's transformation from a young woman seeking employment to support herself into someone who had helped heal a family and create lasting happiness for multiple people demonstrated the power of moral courage and compassionate action to change lives in ways that extend far beyond immediate circumstances. Her willingness to risk her own security and happiness in order to provide Edward with truth that might hurt him had proven to be the foundation for love that was stronger and more satisfying than any relationship built on partial knowledge or comfortable lies. The correspondence that Charlotte maintained with other governesses and young women in similar positions became a way to share the lessons she had learned about the importance of integrity and honest communication in building relationships that could provide both security and happiness, while her example inspired others to choose truth over convenience even when that choice involved personal risk and uncertain outcomes. Her story became part of the oral tradition that passed moral instruction from one generation to the next, demonstrating that individual acts of courage and honesty could have lasting impact that extended far beyond the immediate participants. The success of Charlotte and Edward's marriage, the healing of Edward and James's friendship, and the happiness of children who grew up with realistic understanding of love's complexity while being surrounded by adults who had chosen truth and forgiveness over deception and resentment, provided evidence that even the most complicated family situations could be resolved through honest communication and willingness to prioritize love and healing over pride and convention. Years later, when Charlotte's own children asked about the circumstances that had brought their parents together and the reasons why James Morrison was such an important part of their family despite not being related by blood, she was able to share a story that taught them about the power of truth to heal, the importance of compassion for people whose choices were limited by circumstances beyond their control, and the possibility of creating happiness from even the most difficult beginnings. When all parties were committed to honesty and understanding. Charlotte's discovery of Margaret's letter and her decision to reveal its contents had created ripple effects that continued to influence their family and community for generations, demonstrating that individual acts of moral courage could change not only immediate circumstances but also broader patterns of behavior and expectation that affected how people approached relationships, truth-telling, and the resolution of complex emotional situations. Her story became part of the family legend that shaped how her descendants understood love, marriage, and the responsibilities that come with possessing information that could help or harm others depending on how it was used. The growth of Edward's business and the expansion of his family's influence in Boston society provided Charlotte with opportunities to use her position and knowledge to help other families facing similar challenges, while her reputation for wisdom and discretion made her someone that other women sought out for advice about difficult family situations and moral dilemmas that required careful consideration of competing loyalties and obligations. The house on Louisburg Square, which had been a place of hidden sorrow and unresolved grief when Charlotte first arrived, became known throughout Boston as a home where love and honesty created happiness that was both deep and lasting, where children were raised with realistic understanding of human complexity combined with faith in the possibility of creating good relationships through moral courage and compassionate communication. The library where Margaret's letter had hidden for years became a gathering place for serious conversations about literature, philosophy, and the moral questions that shaped how people chose to live their lives, while the letter itself was preserved as a family document that reminded future generations of the importance of truth and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Charlotte's story, with its message that love built on complete honesty was stronger than love built on partial knowledge or comfortable deception, became part of the moral education that shaped not only her own children but also the children of friends and neighbors who recognized the wisdom of her example and sought to apply similar principles in their own families and relationships. Her transformation from a young woman seeking employment into someone whose moral courage had created healing and happiness for multiple people demonstrated the power of individual choice to change circumstances that might have seemed fixed and impossible to improve. The love between Charlotte and Edward, tested by crisis and strengthened by their shared commitment to truth and understanding, provided a foundation for marriage that lasted throughout their lives and created a legacy that influenced their children, grandchildren, and the broader community that witnessed their example of how honest communication and mutual respect could create relationships that enhanced rather than diminished the lives of everyone involved. As I close Charlotte's remarkable story, I'm deeply moved by how her accidental discovery became the key that unlocked healing for an entire family. Her courage to reveal painful truth rather than protect comfortable lies shows us that real love seeks what's best for others, even when that might mean losing everything we hold dear. Charlotte didn't just find love in that Boston mansion, she created it through honesty, wisdom, and the kind of moral courage that transforms not just individual lives but entire communities. Her story reminds us that secrets have the power to poison relationships for generations, but truth, even painful truth, can heal wounds we didn't even know existed. The love between Charlotte and Edward, built on the foundation of Margaret's revealed secret, became stronger than any relationship built on partial knowledge or comfortable deceptions could ever be. What strikes me most about Charlotte's journey is how she chose love over security, truth over comfort, and healing over self-protection. She could have kept Margaret's letter hidden, could have pursued her own happiness without complicating it with difficult revelations, but she understood that love without complete honesty is like a house built on sand. It might stand for a while, but it will eventually fall. Have you ever been in Charlotte's position, holding a secret that could either heal or hurt someone you care about? How did you decide what was right? Have you discovered that someone you loved was hiding something that changed everything you thought you knew about them? Share your experiences in the comments below, because these stories of moral courage and the complexity of love help us understand how to navigate our own difficult choices. If Charlotte's story has touched your heart and shown you the power of choosing truth over convenience, please subscribe to hear more tales of people who found extraordinary love through ordinary courage. Your support helps me continue preserving these stories that remind us that the most beautiful relationships are built on foundations of complete honesty and mutual understanding. I'm Eleanor, and I rescue stories that prove love and truth are the most powerful forces in human experience, that moral courage can transform the most complicated situations, and that sometimes our greatest happiness comes from having the strength to reveal secrets that were meant to heal rather than harm. Charlotte and Edward's love story shows us that when we choose truth over comfort and honesty over convenience, we create the possibility for relationships that are stronger than any force that tries to destroy them.